Last week we took an adventure to find El Dorado. We laughed, we cried, we were traumatized by an aquatic vehicle while being shot at. But today, well, today's a whole new adventure. Hey everyone, my name's Kane, and on occasion I play games, and today we're continuing our deep dive into the Uncharted franchise by looking at Uncharted 2 Among Thieves from 2009. While I hadn't played any of these video games before doing this review series on them, I had heard of Uncharted 2 quite a bit, with the game receiving unanimous praise online. In fact, even while I was streaming this game on my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/KanePlaysGames_, I had members of my chat telling me about this game and how good it was, so my expectations are pretty high going into this video. Quick reminder that for the first 3 Uncharted games in this franchise review, we're going to be looking at them via their remastered versions on the Nathan Drake collection, and we're going to be playing them all on PS5. So will this unanimously praised game live up to its hype? Well, I want to remind you to hit that like button if you enjoy what you see today, press subscribe for future videos, and sit back and relax as we ask Uncharted 2 Among Thieves, how bad can it be? Right off the bat, Uncharted 2 has a really great opening sequence. You're wounded, sitting on a train that's dangling precariously over a cliff, being forced to climb your way up in a blizzarding snowstorm, taking out enemies before flashing back to how you got there. This sequence acts as a wonderful setup to the game, building up the mystery and intrigue of the narrative, while also making for a great tutorial to get to grips with the controls. It's really well done. I've got to be honest though, Uncharted 2 didn't really get better than this for me personally. In fact, I'd argue that it even took a step down, at least narratively speaking. Whilst I do think that the game recovered eventually and became enjoyable again, I think starting with a sequence this amazing was a bit of a double-edged sword in hindsight. This opening sequence made me want to keep playing and work out what was happening, but the game takes its time getting there. It shuffles its feet along instead of jumping right into some interesting stuff. And whilst that isn't inherently a bad thing, I think the execution here was a bit too slow. Among Thieves tries to do what the first game did so well by introducing us to 2 of Drake's companions in Harry Flynn and Chloe Fraser. The only problem is that neither of these characters are that interesting. They lack the charisma and personality of Elena and Sully. Harry Flynn is just an idiot who telegraphs his betrayal so much you could call him a dead medium, and Chloe is just lacking in general for me. Being the femme fatale type isn't inherently a bad thing, but there at least needs to be something else going on with the character to give them some substance, and there just isn't with Chloe. The performance hints at a deeper character, but the writing certainly doesn't. Chloe is essentially just eye candy for male gamers. She doesn't evolve as a character in the story, or really do a whole lot outside of making promiscuous jokes. She's just a trope. Though I have been informed she does get better as a character throughout the series. This lack of personality also stretches into the villains of the game, which may honestly be more boring than the first game's slice of white bread, and I didn't even think that was possible. Lazarevich is just an evil Eastern European bad guy, the exact same type we've seen in countless media products since the 1950s. He's strong, brutish, and power-hungry, with no actual sense of character. He's evil for the sake of being evil, painfully generic. And that's honestly how I'd describe the story of Among Thieves in general. Generic. Now that's not to say Uncharted 2's story is bad. It's not. I think it's very good. I think it's on par with the first game, but it's a little too on par with the first game. It's pretty much the same story, but with some character shuffling and an added flashback at the beginning. A lot of the plot beats are nearly identical, and it lacks any narrative innovation, which is a little disappointing for a sequel. I should also mention here, this actually isn't in the script, this is just a little addendum from me upon reflection. I do think that the game's story gets better as it goes along. I think it does a bit more interesting and unique things. However, playing these 2 games back to back, it didn't really feel that special. It didn't feel like the game that a lot of people were describing to me. It just felt like a bigger version of the first Uncharted, which we'll get to. I found a quote from the LA Times' review of the game that honestly sums it up perfectly. It states that Uncharted 2 would fit better on a big screen in some multiplex, as if it were a Hollywood blockbuster. I think it's absolutely right in this assessment. Uncharted 2 is a Hollywood blockbuster story in a video game, which is always impressive to pull off, especially in 2009. While the plot points are much the same, the sense of scale within the narrative is a lot bigger, befitting of this more Hollywood-appropriate story. The dialogue, scenarios, and action set pieces are nothing to be scoffed at and are still very strong, but I also can't help but feel like this blockbuster vibe also adds to that generic feeling I'm getting. The overall charm and uniqueness of the original Uncharted aren't there, or aren't there as much at least. I could picture myself watching a million movies with this exact feel, many of them probably starring The Rock. The best way I could compare Uncharted to cinema is by comparing it to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The first Uncharted story is that original Iron Man movie. It sets the formula that would then fuel the Marvel machine, pumping out blockbusters that are still a lot of fun in their storytelling, but lacking that sense of innovation to take them to that next level creatively. I can still watch Marvel movies and get a kick out of them and enjoy every film that I see, but a lot of the time I'm left wanting more from them and not always in the good way that they want me to be. Honestly, that's how I felt about Among Thieves as well. I really enjoyed my time playing this game, but I couldn't help but feel like it was lacking a little bit. I wanted more from it, and it just never really provided that, even when it did recover and become a much better game by the end. It was just missing something for me, and I don't really know what it was. I do want to clarify once again that I do think it's still a very enjoyable story and one that I had a lot of fun with, but after being told how much better Uncharted 2 was for the original, to have it be on par or arguably a little worse than its predecessor in terms of narrative enjoyment was a little bit of a bummer for me personally. It was good, but it was a little too cookie cutter for my taste, too Hollywood. Games as a medium, to me at least, are great because they don't have to conform to that blockbuster appeal all the time. They're free to be more varied and unique in their creative exploration. Of course, a game isn't solely defined by its story, so I want to take the time to talk you through the rest of Uncharted 2's ups and downs, starting with the way it looks, because quite frankly, Uncharted 2 looks absolutely outstanding. The locations, scenery, and set pieces in Among Thieves are among the best I've ever seen in a video game, with so much thought and design put into each of them. It's honestly a vast improvement over the first game, and is a large component to why this game visually feels like a movie. The scope and epicness of every locale is top tier. If I were to have one nitpick about the way the game looks, is that the climbing prompts are a lot more obvious in Among Thieves, which honestly detracted a little from the immersion for me, but it did also lead to less time looking around for what to do, so it's not all that bad. Speaking of climbing though, and I've got to admit, I think this got a lot worse between games. The controls when climbing and jumping around in Uncharted 2 feel a lot less fluid and more finicky than the first title. It's honestly a shame, as I think the actual puzzles and climbing/parkour parts of the game are fantastically designed, being the best I've ever played, and that is 100% not hyperbolic. They are fantastic. The sequence in the temple where you're climbing a giant statue and reflecting light beams is really well done, as is the vast majority of the action parkour sequences. The section where you're on a sign shooting enemies, the convoy hopping, and the train sequences are a lot of fun, apart from one major drawback. You know it, I know it, it's the combat. Oh god, the combat. I do want to make a slight addendum to my criticism of the combat on last week, because I don't think I was clear enough in what the problem actually was. As whilst I don't like the combat that much, it's not the gunplay that bothers me. I think the gunplay is perfectly fine, it does the job. It's more of the way that each of these sequences are structured that's the problem for me. And there is a definite improvement between the first and second games in terms of their combat, but the improvement isn't really big enough, and definitely not enough to justify the amount of combat there is in Among Thieves, as it is still by far the worst part of it. Uncharted's combat was really bad, and honestly it was only bad for one reason and one reason alone. The segments were just way too long and repetitive. The gunplay, like I said, it's absolutely fine, but they were an absolute chore to get through. So what was Uncharted 2's response to this? The only way to improve upon combat scenarios that are too long, of course, is to make them longer and add more of them in a longer game. When I say that I wanted to tear my own hair out at points in this game, I mean it. The train sequence and convoy sequence were a lot of fun to begin with, but they felt like they were never going to end, as did the entire final third of the game, with extended combat sequence after extended combat sequence, many of which had quite the difficulty increase due to harder hitting enemies and spongier enemies. Add on top of that a glitch so severe that it completely stopped my progression through the game at one point until I found a fix, and we have an experience that I think soured my opinions on the title overall. The story was a lot of fun, even though I hoped for something new, and as a narrative guy that's very important to me, but gameplay is also a vital component to the overall experience, and Uncharted 2 Among Thieves' gameplay just didn't cut it for me personally. It took the great parts of the first Uncharted and made them a bit worse, and whilst the bad bits of the first Uncharted were slightly improved upon, it was still pretty bad and we happened to get more of them. It slowly drained the fun from the experience and turned Uncharted 2 from a journey I was personally enjoying despite its flaws, to one that outstayed its welcome for me towards the end, if not for the admittedly charming final scene. And that's Uncharted 2, a game that's pretty good, but honestly no better than the title that came before it, at least in its remastered state. I think more people need to acknowledge how good that first game truly is in its remastered form, as to me, these games are pretty much neck and neck. I think where this game has some more interesting designs and locations, the previous game has better characters and writing, and while this one has better combat and puzzle design, the previous one has better climbing and parkour. They pretty much balance themselves out for me. Thanks for watching this video on Uncharted 2 Among Thieves. I really hope this hasn't annoyed absolutely everyone, but it wouldn't be the first time I've done that now, would it? If you enjoyed what you saw today, remember to hit that like button and consider subscribing for future uploads, but if you want more content right now, consider clicking one of the links that have appeared on screen. They'll take you right to a video that the algorithm has deemed worthy for your eyes. I've been Kane, and I'll see you all soon.